Hello, and welcome to the National Archives Foundation's virtual program series. I'm Patrick Madden, the Executive Director of the Foundation. We are the proud nonprofit partner to the National Archives. Greetings from a cloudy Washington, D.C. Through this foundation programming, we are pleased to open the virtual doors of the National Archives and its more than 15 billion records, objects, films, letters, drawings, photographs, and most importantly, the stories of our nation's past. Thank you for joining us today from home. I'm honored to have another spirited conversation with four women who have something to say about the history of the 26th Amendment, its powerful legacy, and how it continues to shape our country today. Our panelists will take your questions. So to make sure you know how to use YouTube after a year and a half of being at home, we'll be using the chat box to the right of your screen. And to practice, put your hometown and state there, and we will give you a shout out later on in the program. I see we've got some regulars with us today. I'm proud to introduce the first two speakers. First, I've got Judith Batty, the interim CEO of the Girl Scouts of the USA. Not surprisingly, Judith grew up in Girl Scouting, making her way through the ranks. She also served as a junior troop co-leader like her mother before her. Judith served on the national board from 2014 to 2020 and as the Girl Scouts International Commissioner from 2017 to 2020. She made history in August of 2020 when she became the first Black woman to assume the CEO role of the Girl Scouts of the USA. And as if that wasn't enough, she spent more than 2 decades in the corporate sector, distinguishing herself, and she is active on many professional and charitable organizations and boards and advisory committees. Our second speaker at the top here is Caroline Klibanoff. She's the program director of Made by Us, a national coalition that mobilizes history and civics institutions to engage millennials and Gen Z, leading up to our nation's 250th. Previously, she was project manager for exhibitions at the MIT Museum, coordinating plans for the brand new museum opening in 2021. She's worked digital strategy for Big Tent Nation and Bridge Alliance, and held roles at the Pew Research Center and Frameworks Institute. She also launched a history blog co-written with her sisters called Sistery. I knew I was gonna get that wrong. Judith and Caroline, welcome. Are you with us?
Hello. Hey, Patrick, how are you?
All right, so
Hello.
glad you guys can join us. I'm gonna start with Caroline. I would like you to give us a history lesson. How did the 26th Amendment come about? What was the landscape at the time? Were there specific organizations involved? Give us the landscape, if you will.
Yeah, it's great to be here. Thank you for having me. The history of youth voting goes back before the 26th Amendment was passed, of course. Well before 1971, when the 26th Amendment was passed, young people did have a voice in politics, even without having the vote. So they were active in political campaigns, which were very much fought out on the streets, much the way we see them happening on social media today and in the news media. That was a young person's game. So they would be roped into campaigns, they were politically active. And the voting age at that time was 21. And so as we turn the corner into the 1900s, and you start to see different social movements come about. The civil rights movement was, of course, front and center. Young people were serving as the foot soldiers of the civil rights movement long before they had the right to vote. It took many people. It went on for many decades. Similarly, then you have the anti-war movement with Vietnam. You had the fight for women's rights, the fight for gay rights. So young people were involved in social movements and political movements leading up to getting the right to vote. And so when you have the 50s and 60s come along and there's these burgeoning social movements with young people at the helm, they are spurred on by the war in Vietnam, where all of a sudden young people are drafted into service. You know, it was men that were drafted, but young women certainly had a role to play here on the home front. Also, many young women volunteered. The slogan for the right to vote became old enough to fight, old enough to vote. It became incongruous to have to go fight in a war to be drafted into war without having the right to determine the future of our country through voting. So that really, really sparked momentum. And, this was the fastest passed amendment to the Constitution ever. It's not that there wasn't opposition. It's just that there was decades of work that preceded the actual putting this to a vote. So you actually had Georgia and West Virginia and Kentucky had lowered the voting age prior in their own state. They had already lowered the voting age from 21. States that you may not think, were as active in some of these social movements. But there was a sense among young people that no matter what your politics are, you should have a say. And so this really takes hold in the national story and the national psyche. And by the time you get to 1971, when it's called for a vote, it is considered an extension of the 1965 Voting Rights Act. And this was ratified pretty quickly by 38 states, which was enough to make it a national federal law. And of course, the actual ratification document is in the National Archives. So it's there for anyone to see online. I was just looking at it myself. And so I think the other thing, just to keep in mind is that there was opposition. There were certainly some groups that said lowering the voting age from 21 to 18 gives voice to people who are not mature enough to vote, who don't have enough knowledge, or they don't have good judgment. And then there were other opponents that said, we're all for it in theory, but we don't know if this is constitutional. So just like many laws, this gets stuck in sort of the procedural, the process for a long time. But when it comes to a vote, it goes really quickly, and all political sides, not like there's two, but different political parties see this as a potential boon to their voter base. So really, it's hard to oppose for most politicians at that point.
Great. Well, this, fast forwarding here, the activism by young people, we know that the founders of our country were the millennials of their day. Let's fast forward to, what the work that you're doing, trying to drum up activism among youth and young adults through Made by Us. Can you talk about how that links to 50 years ago and what you're doing?
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, if you were hearing in the story of how the 26th Amendment came to be, if you were hearing parallels to today, you're not alone. There were many different social movements that spurred on young people, as I said, whether women's rights or gay rights or civil rights across racial divides. Those moved young people, especially, to action. Today, we are also seeing a generation that is really civically engaged, whether speaking out about the climate or gun rights or schooling disruptions during COVID-19. There are a lot of issues that feel very important to young people because they affect their everyday life. And with COVID-19, we have also seen that as schools disrupted and careers are disrupted, that has served as a catalyst for many young people to really say, what is the future of my country and how can I have a say, as a voter, but also year round, because elections only come every 2 years. So there are ways to make a difference year round. So through Made by Us, which of course the National Archives Foundation is one of our founding partners, we are bringing together history museums and historic sites all across the country to work together to support youth civic engagement with history. History really is that first building block of civic participation. If we know better, we can do better. And so by teaming up, we can pool our resources, we can meet young people where they are and provide them with the tools, the expertise, the resources they need to be civically engaged. And so we're seeing a lot of enthusiasm among young people, especially, this summer, now that Juneteenth has been made a federal holiday. That was something many young people called for last year, having a new awareness of that history and that story. Now it has come to fruition. So Made by Us is leading an effort to create a civic season between Juneteenth and July 4th. That is a time for everyone, no matter how old you are, everyone to come take a look at our past, school up on how we got here, skill up for our future, and take action in a way that complements the election cycle and complements what we do as informed voters, but really drives a new tradition for everyone to take part in.
Terrific. And I think we'll hear more about that. And I'm sure we'll have some questions along the way. Judith, let's go back a little further. Let's go back 100+ years. The Girl Scouts obviously have been a force in communities and shaping the lives of millions of girls pre-voting age, generally speaking. Tell us a little bit about the founding, civic engagement, how that's changed over the years. I know you've got a lot going on today.
We do, and thank you for having me. I'm so happy to be here. So as you know, Girl Scouts was founded in 1912 by Juliette Gordon Low, and it was founded as a civics organization. It was, we have a promise and a law, and in the promise is Girl Scouts will help other people at all times. So we were founded on to be civic minded and to be helpful and to do projects that would help your community. And during our long history, we've had so many projects that have helped communities at different points in times, but things that stand out in our history is, during World War I, Girl Scouts helped the American Red Cross prepare bandages and sheets, and they raised money for the war effort. And during the Spanish flu in 1918, we ran soup kitchens. We helped hospital staffs, and, volunteered as nurses and nurses' aides. And Juliette Gordon Low was a woman who grew up in a rather privileged family, and she was concerned that her privilege would lead her not to be a productive citizen and be a help to her community. And so part of starting Girl Scouts was so that girls could be involved in their community and understand what issues face their community and to help out where they could. And so, we have this long storied history, but I want to bring it sort of full circle. During COVID, this past year and a half, our iconic cookies, well, we organized cookie donations for truck drivers and hospital workers. We set up community food drives. Our girls got very inventive during COVID. They sewed masks for hospital staff. One Girl Scout troop, they have a robotics team, and they did 3D printing of face shields for frontline workers with their robotics team. So, we had projects that fight food insecurity. So we are, our girls are very civic minded, and we have been for the past 100 years, and we continue to be. At Girl Scouts, we have 3 highest awards for different levels of Girl Scouts. We have our Bronze Award, Silver Award, and our Gold Award. And our Bronze Award is for junior Girl Scouts who are sort of that grade 4 to 6. And then cadets for the Silver Award. And then our Gold Award is for our seniors, our older Girl Scouts. And when you look at some of the projects of our Gold Award Girl Scouts, they're definitely amazing and definitely civic minded. In order to earn your Gold Award, basically you have to identify a problem in your community, work with your mentors and other people in the community to solve that problem, and then actually do a solve. And I was one of our Gold Award Girl Scouts. I was reading about her the other day. She lives in the city. There's food insecurity. She actually started a community garden in her community that now services a few of the food banks in her community. There is one, this project always stands out to me. There was one Gold Award Girl Scout who lives in a mountainous community near a ski area, but not near any hospital. The closest hospital was an hour away. And she was into STEM and into engineering, and she actually worked with her community and built a solar-powered heliport which is now used by emergency helicopters to transport injured people from her community to the hospital. And she's 17. So, you know, civics is what we do. It's what we're all about. And that hasn't changed over the years.
What an amazing story. And I know we'll dig in a little bit more about how some of the things you're doing now. I want to add our two other speakers now, some real movers and shakers in civic engagement. Anusha, Natarajan, and Kat Calvin, if you want to join us. I will introduce you. Anusha is entering her junior year at Arizona State University, studying sociology and history with a minor in Spanish and certificates in human rights and international studies. I'm exhausted on your behalf, just reading all of that. She's currently serving as the Civic Engagement Coalition Chair and the Andrew Goodman Fellow at her university, advancing voter education. And as the Director of Advocacy of her Honors College Council, she works extensively with the deans to increase civic engagement and racial justice across campus and help develop the first racial justice task force at the Honors College. She has also helped to create an educational nonprofit called Culture Talk, which provides resources for teachers and schools to use to diversify their curriculum in social studies. And then Kat, who's with us, is the founder and executive director of Spread the Vote and the co-founder and CEO of Project ID Action Fund. She's a lawyer, activist, and social entrepreneur who's built a national organization that helps Americans obtain IDs that they need for jobs, housing, and life, allows them to go to the polls. She also co-hosts Vote, the podcast, is an advisor to Ragtag, and sits on the boards in OMG, WTF. We might get into that a little bit more. She's one of Time Magazine's 16 people and groups fighting for a more equal America, and been a business insider, 30 Under 30. And she's done a number of media interviews and been featured. So welcome to both of you. Add to the conversation. I'm going to start with Kat. So you just heard about the Girl Scouts and the civic engagement, and we need a reality check here. Do you agree? Was that your experience? Give us the real skinny.
Well, I'm not going to call the Girl Scouts out. No, I was a daisy through a junior. And I was actually an Army brat. So every Army base we went to, the very first thing we did was find a Girl Scout troop for me and a Boy Scout troop for my brother. And it was all about service and community. I do very distinctly remember paper macheing as a daisy and thinking that was the coolest, most fun thing ever. But it was, you know, all of the badges had something to do with either being involved with, you know, your community or other people, or learning more about yourself to grow. And it was always really exciting getting to choose a badge and, you know, having, you know, all the other sort of girls there and parents. And it was very much part of just the whole feeling of Girl Scouts, and the whole reason that you were in it is that you wanted to be a better citizen and you wanted to, you know, be a better girl and grow up to be a good adult. And that was very much what that, and, you know, like selling enough cookies to get to Girl Scout camp, which I did. Thank you very much. Those were the two big things that were Girl Scouts: community service and getting to camp.
Excellent. So you've taken obviously that grounding. You're very active. Tell us about Spread the Vote.
Sure. Spread the Vote is a national organization that helps people obtain government-issued photo ID, so the ID that you get at the DMV. There are over 21 million eligible voters in this country who don't have ID and who have a very hard time getting it without assistance. If you think about everything you need an ID for, to get a job, to get housing, to get food at a lot of places, I had a lot of food banks, to get nights and shelters, a lot of places, just really everything. And so there are millions and millions of people in this country for whom that is a barrier to helping them escape poverty, to find housing, to start their lives over, and in 36 states to vote. And so what what we do is we help people get all of the documents required. When you go to the DMV, you have to take a stack full of documents. That can be really hard, especially if you're someone, say, who's homeless, and getting a birth certificate and proofs of residency and things like that can be really tough. We also help pay for everything because IDs are not free and those documents are not free. We help make sure they have transportation, because if you don't have an ID, you don't have a car, right? And so basically just helping with all of the things to help them get that ID in their hands, and then they go and they get jobs, they get housing, all sorts of things. But when an election comes around, we also help with education and registration and everything it takes to help people get to the polls.
And so how did you come up with this idea? Like, what struck you to start this?
To make it very brief, Caroline mentioned the Voting Rights Act of 1965. In 2013, the Supreme Court took a big chunk out of it. They're actually about to do that again. And they took out a lot of protections. And so all of a sudden we started having these things like voter ID laws and voter purging that were really impacting young voters. There are a lot of states where you can't vote with a student ID, and it's really hard to get an ID, and elderly voters, voters with low incomes, et cetera. And it became a thing that we were seeing around the country was really, really, people were struggling with. And so after the 2016 election, which was our first national election without the full protections of the Voting Rights Act since 1965, we could really see the impact it had. And once I saw that, I knew that I had to do something. And I thought, well, we'll just get people IDs. And that sounded very simple and was not. But we've been at it for 4 years now, and we've gotten almost 7,000 people IDs and have been able to help thousands of people get to the polls. So it's been pretty great.
Fantastic. And now let me pull in Anusha, who's been waiting patiently on all this. Obviously, in introduction, I talked a little about the Goodman Foundation. I want to go before that. I know you were involved with the organization, the UN Foundation's Girl Up campaign. Can you talk a little bit about that program and how that sort of influenced your civic awareness?
Yeah, certainly. Yeah. So I'm currently the Southwest Regional Director for Girl Up. So I oversee Arizona, New Mexico, Texas, and Oklahoma, which has been great so far. So I actually started with Girl Up back in high school, my senior year. I was like, I want to do something ambitious, end of senior year. So I wish I found about the club earlier, but I was doing Model United Nations too, and I became very intrigued and interested by the United Nations and just kind of how it brings together so many different countries, around the world, and talking about these policy matters. And what Girl Up does, it focuses on improving gender equality in 4 different areas, which are sports, education, STEM learning, and as well as I think I might have mentioned sports, but yeah, leadership and advocacy. And definitely the education and leadership slash advocacy component really stuck out to me because I was really passionate about education access. And also, to me, I see education as a means and a way for women to kind of get involved in these different leadership roles. So, throughout my time this past year, I've been giving different presentations about like the importance of literacy rates in women and young girls. I'm going to be doing it again at our annual leadership summit. And have also been trying to do that same in my own community in Arizona as well, too, just so that people can kind of understand the importance of education, and then kind of looping in kind of how education and civic engagement go together. So I'm really looking forward to, doing more work on that. And I'll also be doing the similar thing, going to be holding a workshop at our leadership summit on, how to stay engaged civically in a non-election year, because, civic engagement doesn't just stop at election day or midterms. It's an ongoing cycle. So there's a lot of work that needs to be done in terms of registering more voters. And yeah, and like I said, I know I mentioned in my bio that I started an organization on cultural education. Girl Up had that international focus, which led me to kind of pursue that, because I just love traveling, love international affairs, and yeah, I love learning about culture. So that's kind of what led me into my multiple interests combining and wanting to join Girl Up.
And then so you landed on campus and then got involved with the Goodman Foundation. Tell us a little bit about that.
Yeah, certainly, for sure. So I was a member of our university's local nonprofit called Changemakers Central, and my chair in the Civic Engagement Committee was like, hey, we're looking for new Andrew Goodman ambassadors. And I was like, cool, I'd love to join. I'd love to apply, just because civic engagement is very important, especially coming from a very large public university in Arizona with, I think, over about 50,000 students. So, I think it's important to have everyone involved and engaged in our community. So I became acquainted with the Andrew Goodman Foundation, and some of the work that we have done in this past year. I know the pandemic didn't stop us, but it just made, gave us a little bit of challenges on, how we can engage, especially incoming freshmen coming into the university. Like, how can we tell them to go vote? Like, what are some ways we can keep them engaged? So I think last August, we held an event where we brought in Hassan Minaj to talk about the importance of being civically engaged and, just advice on just go out, register and vote. So we had about over, I think, 1,300 people attend that. And we even put information on how to register to vote, upcoming dates to be aware of, because I think that's the base that, people need to be aware of. And then throughout the last semester, we were working with the other Andrew Goodman fellows in the other campuses and figure out what are some game plans that we can engage our universities. It was cool to talk to some Andrew Goodman fellows from the swing states. I think especially in Georgia, because we were the key pivotal states because, our being a swing state, it's important to have everyone turn out and vote. So, we were figuring out strategies for that. We were also focusing on voter education. That was a big thing that we wanted to do. So we did a lot of work on that as well, making graphics, putting announcements, going on social media and telling people these are the polling locations. And I know in Arizona, we had a couple of date changes on voter registration. So we had to blast that communication out. And being involved with the Andrew Goodman Foundation also allowed me to become the co-chair of our University Civic Engagement Coalition, where we work with other civic organizations like student government and the nonprofit space I mentioned, Changemaker Central, to come up with university-wide efforts on, how we can be civically engaged during a non-election year. What are some opportunities for students to be more civically engaged? So we're continuing and doing that work.
Terrific. Well, we want to make sure our audience is engaged as well. So I want to remind you to ask questions in the chat. I see a few have come in. We've got folks, I can tell you, Judith, the Girl Scout Nation is well represented watching today. We have folks from California, obviously the DC, Maryland, Virginia area is well represented. Scranton, Pennsylvania, Ohio, Colorado Springs, St. Augustine, Michigan, Massachusetts, Poughkeepsie, New York, Gulf Breeze, Florida, Minnesota. We've got a national audience here, which is terrific, and then many other comments about experiences as Girl Scouts. So as not to be shocking, they are well represented. Judith, I want to sort of come back to you and talk a little bit about the importance of instilling civic duty as part of your work. And do you have data about how engaged Girl Scouts are in civics?
So I have some data. When the pandemic hit, we pivoted as an organization, and because our meetings are usually in person, and we set up Girl Scouts at home. And it's really interesting. On Girl Scouts at home, the activities that are sort of the most popular, shall we say, are democracy badges. We launched 3 sets of civics related democracy badges in 2020 for all ages from K through 12. And, we had a great funding partner in Citi Foundation. Thank you, Citibank. But, it was to teach girls about how local government works. It's not only, everybody kind of was focused on elections and federal government, but it's also important for girls to understand how local government works, state government works, and equipping them with sort of who their political leaders are, both at the local level and at the national level. And those badges, even to today, we thought it was interesting because, elections were coming up, but even today, they're still very, very popular. We also had, in 2020, we had a patch to commemorate the centennial of the suffrage movement. And that patch too is very popular. And I, last year gave a few talks to councils and to girls about the history of the suffrage movement and the role that women played in getting the vote and how it was different for white women and minority women, and how even though, women got the right to vote with the passage of this of the amendment, that all women really didn't get the right to vote until we passed the Civil Rights Act, Civil Rights Amendment. So that's kind of where we are. I mean, statistics wise, our Girl Scouts Research Institute has done some research, and it's interesting. Girls are, and boys actually, because when we did our research, we actually focused just on youth. So we have data on girls and boys, but 7 in 10 young people believe that both women and men make equally good political leaders. And this is actually a change. We did a study in 2008, and the percentage of girls who thought men would make better political leaders was 17%. And when we did it just recently, it was down to 13%. So we're making progress. Girls are becoming more confident. 62% of the women that we polled ages 18 to 22 intended to vote this was done right before the last election, and they intended to vote in the election. And 82% of those were already registered. So, we've stepped up our civics engagement, especially since a lot of schools now don't teach civics. So this is a way for girls to understand local government, to understand how they can impact society, even though they can't vote yet. They understand how to talk to their congressman, how to talk to their local mayor, how to go to the state house. I mentioned the Gold Award earlier. There was one Gold Award Girl Scout in Alabama. Alabama doesn't have a seatbelt law, a drunk driving, I think it was seatbelt law. So she actually petitioned to get the seatbelt law passed in Alabama. She had a friend who was killed in a car accident and didn't have a seatbelt. So, our girls are active civically. The data bears that out. The data bears out that they are, they're very active and continue to be active. And, there's one statistics, 9 in 10 young women, and actually 6 in 10 boys feel it would be a positive event to have a woman in the White House. So maybe that's the next step.
That's it. Well, I think there's a lot of adults that would agree with that statement as well. Caroline, I'd like to ask, I'm going to work in a question that came from the audience along with one of mine, if that's okay. So one from the audience, do you think the passing of the 26th Amendment was a way to quell the protests of civil rights and the anti-war movement and channel social energy into the comparatively less disruptive act of voting? What's your take on that?
Yes, absolutely. And good eye to whoever asked that. It was certainly a way to say, okay, you're doing a lot, young people today. You are really making waves, pushing for all kinds of radical change, so to speak. Maybe if we give them the right to vote, they will stop that. That was one thought on sort of the conservative side. And the other thought coming out of some universities and from young people who were leaning conservative was there are more young conservative voices than we're hearing. So if we lower the voting age, that will give more space to those voices. So every political side thought this was going to benefit them and thought this would, increase their political base, really. And if you're a politician, it's seen as a win for you. It's just like, some issues today that are specific to certain demographics, like youth.
Mm-hmm. And so with that, to play off of Judith's data, in your work, can you talk a little bit about what you're seeing around women and the role that they're playing in civic engagement?
Yes. So for Made by Us, we really do focus on this 18 to 30 audience. So once you've been through the Girl Scouts and you've been to school, and I was a Girl Scout and my mother was a Girl Scout herself and then became a cookie mom. So like truly, truly devoted. But once, and I think I have to say that some of what we're doing now with Made by Us comes out of this training, because once you age out of that K-12 age range and you got all your badges, how can you keep earning those civic engagement badges as an adult? Because it is a year-round practice and it does take all of us. So through Made by Us, we're seeing that there's young people across the country that want ways to engage. They want to help their communities. They want to take on leadership roles, and women are leading the way. They're trendsetters among their peers. They are interested in being informed, interested in sharing that information. So, you know, whether that's happening on Instagram or TikTok, there's a whole network of communication around, I learned this and I want to share it with you. So that's one thing that we're seeing among young women and men, but especially among young women who are 18 to 22, that sort of college age.
Okay. And Anusha and Kat, I want to sort of get your take on the youth vote in the recent elections, and specifically minority women. Can you all talk about what your experience was, maybe some stories from the COVID? You know, the experience is very different, obviously, in the last major election. So Anusha, I'll have you jump in.
Yeah, for sure. So part of my responsibilities as Changemaker Civic Engagement Chair, I wanted to combine my interest for culture and civic engagement. So I worked with student groups who identify as Hispanic and Latina descent, and we helped plan a roundtable. So we brought in, political science professors who were Latina, and we also brought in many different political leaders, like who ran nonprofits like Mi Familia Vota. So we wanted to have this event just so that we can kind of, motivate people to get out and vote and kind of understand the stories, especially, women of Latina or Latina descent, on kind of what was their intentions in being involved in their communities. We even brought in a mayor from El Mirage, a city in Arizona, just kind of hear about their stories about why they decided to major in political science, or, why they wanted to get involved in their communities, just so that we can kind of see their stories and kind of understand, why is it important to vote? Why is it important to be involved? So I held a lot of events like that. This was kind of after voting, but I also worked with some members of the Native American and different tribal communities to hold an informational event just about what are tribal governments and, kind of how the different entities, nonprofit organizations function within the tribal government. So I did similar work, just kind of around that area, trying to, motivate people to kind of understand about the surrounding community around us and just, why, and also target different demographics, to show why it's important to vote. That's actually my goal for midterms, because midterm elections are coming up, and I, want college students to be more excited about midterms because it is a local election. And I know many of the panelists have emphasized the importance of local elections. So my goal is to make more information accessible, because I know ASU, we have a lot of students from over 150 different nations, and we want to have the information on like how to register to vote and, where to register to vote in their respective languages, thought of translating it into Spanish and maybe some Asian languages, so that, they might feel less intimidated to get out and vote. So I'm hoping to do more improvements on especially increasing accessibility on voter registration and, getting out the vote efforts.
Great. Kat, do you want to jump in? And then I've got one follow on from the audience for you.
Sure. So, 2020 was kind of an amazing year because thanks to COVID, we saw states implement basically every voting expansion practice that voting rights experts have been begging people to do forever. So we saw expanded vote by mail, expanded early voting, increased polling places, really everything. It it was a dream of voting. If it hadn't been in the middle of a global pandemic, it would have been truly glorious. But the result of that is that we saw record turnout across almost every single demographic, including young voters, including voters of color. And so what it really proved is, look, this should be a no-brainer, but apparently it's not. If you make voting easier, more people will do it. And so, now, and that is now, if you haven't all paid attention to the news or haven't, that this has been a big year for fighting. There's a big voting rights versus voter suppression battle happening as we speak. And it's because we saw that huge expansion. And so last year was this really incredible year when a lot of people were able to access the polls in a way that they hadn't before. And now what we have to do is we have to fight really, really hard to make sure that people are able to do that, to make sure that we are eliminating voter ID laws, to make sure that we are increasing vote by mail practices, and that we are increasing early voting, and really all of the things that we saw work, because they did work, and they work for young people. And one of the reasons that young people have traditionally low voter turnout is because we make it very hard for young people to vote. It's not that they don't care, it's that we make it really, really hard for them. And we proved that last year. So now we just have to fight really hard to be able to keep that turnout high.
And then just as a follow on, do you work with local and state governments to try and create voter ID that is perhaps easier to obtain than a driver's license or current acceptable forms of ID?
So we started, so on the 501c3 side, just some like basic nonprofit law, you're not allowed to do anything like governmental or partisan with a nonprofit. And so we, like a lot of nonprofits, have something called a 501c4, which is allowed to do political things. And actually the very big thing that we are trying to do with that is to change state legislation and to change DMV rules to make it easier for people to get IDs. So we've seen some really extraordinary things, like states like Arizona in 2018 that passed a law making IDs free for all veterans, which, look, it should be. They're veterans. We saw Virginia just recently passed a law that mandated that returning citizens be given an ID when they are released from prison. That's not a thing that happens right now. And so we release people from prison and we say, go get a job and a house and all these things, but we don't give them the ID that they need to do it. And so what we're working on our political side is just that, is working to make it easier to help people get the ID we need. But what we and voting rights activists in general are working on is also getting rid of voter ID laws, because we have over 21 million eligible voters who don't have ID and who don't have things like a utility bill. You don't have a utility bill if you're homeless, right? And so saying that you need that to vote is saying that you don't deserve to participate in democracy if you're unhoused, or if you're a student living at home, right? Like, there are a lot of people who don't have leases or utility bills or things in their name. And so we're working on both making it easier for people to get IDs because they need them for their lives, but also getting rid of the poll tax that is voter ID laws.
What about, and I'll sort of let anybody answer this one, there's a perception that young people who vote are Democratic or progressive. Does the panel agree? This is from our audience. I know you all do voter education. So what's your take on that? Maybe we'll start with Kat and go to Anusha.
Well, first of all, just go to TikTok, because there are a lot of conservative kids on TikTok making videos. So they're out there. They're using social media. Look, young people are always a little more progressive than old people, right? Like, this is why rock and roll was considered evil, because young people liked it and weren't cutting their hair. So yes, young people tend to be a little more progressive. Now, those young people get old, and unfortunately, they, get more conservative and boring, and they start cutting their hair. Yes, young people are always going to be a little more radical than their parents. But that changes, and regardless, they're people who live in the country and are allowed to vote. So regardless of how progressive or radical or young or how long their hair is, they should still be allowed to vote. And we should still be making it accessible to them because they're citizens.
Okay, Anusha, do you agree or disagree? Hair length is directly correlated to party. Yes.
Yeah, no, I definitely learned this, especially going to a very large university like Arizona State. We have so many different political groups, like all the way from far left to far right. So I definitely do see like very different, political party preferences. And I was, surprised to see that there's a lot of people who they might be progressive on social issues, but they might be conservative on fiscal issues. So you see a lot of people who are kind of in between. That's who I see more. But we also still have people who might be part of the College Republicans Club. We also have like college libertarians, and then we even have like the ASU Socialist Club. So that's what I really like about our university. That's why we have this coalition, because we want to, kind of help educate about these different views and just have, debates and civic dialogues, or civil discourse, essentially, just because of how diverse the perspectives are with these different issues. So yeah, no, I definitely, coming into ASU has opened my eyes that, yeah, that might tend to be the stereotype, but no, definitely not. There's been a large base of, different political ideologies.
Mm-hmm. Caroline, anything to add?
Yeah, I can jump in. We have done some research with Made by Us, and so we have some data on political affiliation and political attitude. And I just think it's so important to keep in mind that people's views are always evolving. And also what you do with those views is really the marker of civic participation. So well over 50% of Gen Z, which is the one after millennials, has either other as their political affiliation, or I don't like to label it, or no affiliation, or undecided, or independent. So those are not affiliated with a party. There are minorities actually that are affiliated with a party. 58% have a moderate political attitude from our research. So I think it is really nuanced. And part of the reason that we created the civic season, which is happening now between Juneteenth and July 4th, is a time to make space for all of those stories and all of those voices, so that it's not just about one event in history. It's whatever your cause is, whatever you're passionate about. As Anusha said, you could be more left-leaning on one issue and more right-leaning on another. You're able to kind of navigate your path and find the resources that can help you to take action.
Okay. And Judith, I've got two questions in from the audience for you. In California, they allow 16 and 17-year-olds to pre-register to vote. Have you had Girl Scouts who are jumping on that bandwagon, somehow incorporating that into their work?
So we do encourage all Girl Scouts to register as soon as they can. But I can't say statistically whether we have more or less than others. I will say that we have a lot of troops who do, their civic engagement is helping others register to vote. So to the extent they are eligible themselves, they also do register themselves. So we're nonpartisan, so I don't know what my 16 and 17-year-old California Girl Scouts are doing voting wise, but I'm sure they are registered.
Excellent. Well, that ties into, which I think is the sort of the whole model of Girl Scouts, but one of the audience members have asked, how important is mentorship programs with civic engagement? Is there a need for more mentors in this area?
So yes, it's very important. It's interesting because our whole program, the whole Girl Scout leadership experience, is based on girls deciding what's important to them, and an adult, either a leader or a volunteer, helping them and mentoring them to do what's important to them. So mentorship is always important in everything, and especially in civics. Our curriculum, though, is based on the way we do our curriculum. We give the volunteer what they need to help the girl if she wants to do civics. So to the extent there is a troop or even a group of, a separate, a smaller part of a troop, few girls who are interested in civics, the way we do our badge work and what we send to the volunteer to help, that gives them everything they need. So we actually look at it as twofold education, because civics hasn't been taught in schools in a long time. So a lot of times the volunteer is learning right along with the girls, and there is enough data and material in there to help the adult as well.
Terrific. I want to stay on this for a second because it's a really fascinating question. So, like each of our panelists, did you all have civics mentors, or was there, again, like an organization? Obviously, you've talked about organizations that inspired you, but let me sort of go in reverse order. Caroline.
It's a good question, but I'm not fully prepared for. I've had so many people, influence my work. I previously worked for the Bridge Alliance, and that has been a great foundation. And Debbie Lynn Molyneux is a great sort of female leader who has created a movement of people welcoming people in. I actually think, it doesn't certainly always follow gender lines, but I do think creating that space for people to come in, be welcoming, is something that women have excelled in and have brought to the civics movement. So for me, definitely organizations, Made by Us is led by 10 museums, 10 leading beloved museums. And so we have a steering committee of museum CEOs that said, we care about young people. We want them to have a voice, and we're getting together and we're going to make it happen. Actually, I think a lot of Juliette Gordon-Low, the founder of the Girl Scouts, when we do this work, because when Juliette Gordon-Low founded the Girl Scouts, she called her cousin and she said, I've got something for the girls of Savannah and the girls of America and the girls of all the world, and I'm going to start it tonight. And that's like the energy behind Made by Us, from the museum CEOs to the young people that we work with to college students across the country. We have something for America and we are starting it today. So there's that level of mentorship that I think the best mentorship kind of keeps on giving to the next generation.
Great. Anusha, what about you? Did you have a civics mentor?
Oh yeah, I definitely did. Especially, being involved in the Andrew Goodman Foundation, I had my advisors within that organization. And then I also had mentors who supervised the ASU fellows, help me out, give me all these different opportunities, and also recommendations on, how we can approach, how we can approach like civic engagement in this way, especially during the pandemic. Like, what are some options that we can take to consider? And then I'd also, my advisor at Changemaker Central was definitely a big role in telling me to like either dial things down or, maybe try to take an alternate route in hosting this event and, helping me plan like the marketing and just kind of what goes into that event, because I know I would love that expertise and a second opinion. I value that the most. And, I'll just elaborate really quickly, like with my Andrew Goodman advisors at ASU, they help connect me to these amazing, great opportunities. I'm currently serving on the advisory committee for voter outreach at the Secretary of State's office. So, I think without them, I don't think I'd be here, where I am today. So I'm very grateful for them and, kind of shaping the person who I am today.
Terrific. Kat, you had a little time to think about it.
I was listening so intently, I didn't think. Besides the Girl Scouts, obviously, I come from a family of women who are very deeply engaged in the community, and that was always drilled into me as my responsibility was to be involved in the community and to work in the Black community, and like you do whatever you want, but like that's what you have to do. And my grandmother was a librarian and was really involved in the community and the NAACP, etc. And my mom took us voting all the time, and we may have broken the law because I circled in the vote for president because I was the oldest and my brother got some inferior office because he was younger. We always left school. She picked us up and took us to vote, took us to community meetings, things like that. So it was always an expectation. And then, I grew up learning about Juliette Gordon-Low and Mary Lyon. I went to Mount Holyoke and so did my mom. So I grew up my whole life hearing about Mary Lyon going around with a velvet bag, raising money, telling parents that if their girls learned math and science, that they'd be better wives just so that they could like agree to send them to college, right? So I learned to lie from a very early age, but lying for feminism, so it's okay. So that was just always a huge part of my upbringing. And when we were involved in community organizations or things, it was things like Girl Scouts or things that were, church activities or whatever, that where the point and the goal was always to help develop you as a person and to get you engaged in the community. So it was, sort of just everything. I had no choice. I wish that they had been like, just go be a billionaire and go to space and don't care. But they were like, no, you have to work in the community. And I'll never forgive my family for that ever.
Well, and it's interesting when I talk to students and young people, you never know who's going to inspire them to start to go down a certain path. So I often hear parents, for sure, obviously teachers, but there's often it's somebody in the community or a distantly related relative just sort of makes a connection for them. They don't make that connection, and then all of a sudden they've got that spark, which is terrific. So it's great to hear those voices. We are running out of time, but I do have a last question for everyone. And you know, I love to sort of finish here with your vision. Get out your crystal ball and let us know what is the future of youth and also young adult civic engagement. And let's start with Judith.
So from my chair, you know, the Girl Scouts that I see, the Girl Scouts that I learn about, the Girl Scouts that are have graduated, they've all become productive members of society, and they've been very active, like Caroline, like Kat. And the younger Girl Scouts that are coming up now that I engage with, they're no different. The girls are engaged, they're bright, they're asking great questions, they want to learn. And so from my vantage point, as long as I know my Girl Scouts are going to run the world, I'm sitting happy. It's good. The future looks bright.
Excellent. Anusha, what about you?
Yeah, definitely coming in as a young adult, I definitely do see some potential, especially like more younger people paying attention to what's going around in their communities, you know, understanding the importance of voting, especially, you know, technology and social media. I know we talked about it a little bit, has kind of mobilized the spread of information and just kind of like why you should care. So I'm looking forward to seeing like how future elections are going to be looking like, and looking forward to seeing all the different graphics being posted, and just trying to encourage their friends to get out and vote and, you know, be involved in other ways. You know, it might be a non-election year. So I feel like organizations like Girl Up and Girl Scouts, like, you know, trying to mobilizing, you know, young adults is a way to understand the community involvement and, you know, getting involved in elections as well too.
Terrific. And Kat?
I mean, like Caroline said, young people have always been at the forefront of revolutions, right? Any major social change that you've seen has been young people, partially because they don't have like bills and stuff, so they don't have to go to work. So it's easier for them to organize and be out in the streets, but also because they're closer to what's actually happening on the ground, and it's their future. And so, you know, right now we're seeing Gen Z, and they're extraordinary because they're realizing, look, you old people are going to die, and we're going to be the ones without water, right? We're going to be the ones watching the world burn. We're going to be the ones having to deal with this economic system that you built that's not working for anyone, you know, like, and there we see them fighting, we see them engaging, we see them creating organizations and saying, you know, if you're not going to address this issue, I'm going to start an organization, and I'm going to organize all of the other young people in my community or in the country, and we're going to fight for this. And, you know, we're going to go in front of Congress. And, you know, we see young people who aren't old enough to vote who are organizing voter registration, and they're going to speak to their members of Congress and their governors, and they're getting involved. And I think that given, you know, the fact that the technology allows young people to be more connected than ever, and the problems, I think, feel more urgent than they have in a very long time, we are seeing a really extraordinary generation of young people who are not waiting because they know they can't wait. And so I think the future, you know, I wish we could just skip the next 2 generations and just put Gen Z in charge right now. There'd be more dancing than I'm comfortable with, but I think that they change things because they're impatient because they know they don't have time. You know, we can't sit around and wait to fix these issues, and they're doing some really extraordinary things, and they're choosing to push, and they're choosing to educate the adults, and they're not sitting back and being polite about it, and it's incredible. So I think they're going to, you know, if anybody can save the world, we'll see, but it's going to be them.
Excellent. Caroline?
Yeah, it's well said, Kat. And I'm grateful for your work because I don't have a printer. I'm a millennial. I don't know how to print things. I mean, come on. Yeah. So you're doing great work. I think, you know, when I think about the future of youth civic engagement, it's going to be up to the young people. And civic engagement is a lifelong habit. It starts in the Girl Scouts. It starts when you're very young, and it grows and it builds on itself. That's why getting that foundation is so important, and understanding the history is so critical. But it's a habit that you have to practice throughout your life, not only on election day, but year round. And so there's a book by Peter Levine that has the title that I always think of, which is "We Are the Ones We've Been Waiting For." No one else is coming. So for young people today, if young people are watching this, I would almost, challenge you to speak up, make your voice heard, because the next chapter is not written. It really is up to you. And if you are not speaking up, other people are. So it's more incentive, to make sure that you're heard, that you have a say, and to get involved with organizations that are allowing you and your generation to be heard despite all the noise that's out there. So I think young people have a lot more political power than what they sometimes get credit for. And certainly they are architecting the next chapter already. So it's up to the older generations to make sure they are supporting them with the context, with the information, factual, evidence-based information that they need in order to do that work. And I'm just looking forward to seeing what that next chapter looks like. It's going to be very interesting.
Terrific. Well, this has been an amazing conversation. I want to thank Caroline, Judith, Anusha, Kat for sharing your stories, your background, your inspiration. I don't have to tell you to remember the ladies. If you're wondering who's going to make a dent in the future of our country, you're looking at it right here with our guests today. So thank you for joining us and sharing your stories. I just have a few last announcements as we wrap up this program for our viewers. I want to thank all of our sponsors, especially those who are sponsors for Rightfully Hers initiative. And of course, those of you who have joined us, our members, our corporate supporters, our donors. And if you want to become a member of the foundation, you can join today by visiting our website, archivesfoundation.org. Also want to thank my staff, obviously, who make these programs happen, program logistics, Prec, and tech gurus, Keneal McDonald, her chief bottle washer, Jim Dumas, and another Girl Scout who was on our staff, along with Keneal, Liana Ascalise. We aren't done here in June. We've got another program coming up. Join us on June 28th at 5 p.m. for a program celebrating the 50th anniversary of the Congressional Black Caucus. The program will feature comments by Chair of the CBC, Representative Batty, and as well as a conversation with Representative Jim Clyburn, with Secretary Rodney Slater and Governor Jim Blanchard, also offering their thoughts. Because of scheduling requirements, that program will be pre-recorded and aired on June 28th at 5 p.m. And don't forget, July 4th is right around the corner. No one does Patriotic Party better than the National Archives. This year, we've got a day of both in-person and online family activities. So check out archivesjuly4.org so you can get all the details. If you're watching nationally, you can tune in online. If you're in the DC area, you can come on down for some of our family activities. And you can help the National Archives Foundation have a fantastic 4th by visiting the best museum shop in DC and online, nationalarchivesstore.org. Every purchase in our shop supports the mission of the foundation and our educational and exhibition outreach. And did you miss us? Did you miss coming to the National Archives Foundation? Well, we're back. The museum is open on weekends now, and on July 2nd, we will be going to 7 days a week, full hours, but it's still reserved tickets. So time to entry is required. Visit recreation.gov to reserve your ticket. And I happen to know the tickets are all locked up through June. So July, get on there and get your ticket. Register to join us for these programs that are coming up. And of course, you can follow us on social media or sign up for our email so you don't miss anything that's happening. The National Archives is our nation's memory. What is past is prologue. On behalf of the National Archives Foundation, thank you for joining us today.